Hi there, my name is Mr. Makovise, and I'm going to be presenting to you a lesson for Technology Grade 9, and it's going to be based on Term 2 work under the heading Pascal's Law. Okay, so during Term 2 in Technology, we are dealing with hydraulic systems and pneumatic systems. So we want to cover the basic principles on hydraulic systems, which was spearheaded by a French scientist, and his name is Pascal, and he is the one who formed the modern hydraulics fundamental laws that we use today. So according to him, or according to Pascal's principle, it tells us that pressure exerted on one part of a hydraulic system will be transferred equally without any loss in all directions. And I want to just emphasize on the transferred equally and in all directions. Okay, so simply put, any force applied to a confined fluid, such as water inside a syringe, is transmitted in all directions throughout the fluid, regardless of the shape of the container. So we need to remember that a liquid can take up the shape of any container. Okay, so whatever container we're gonna put our liquid in, it's gonna take up that shape. Okay, so here is a very good example of Pascal's law. We've got a syringe that is full with liquid. Okay, so the first thing we do is we apply a force, which is an input force, which is going to be on the piston, and then we find that the input force exerts pressure onto the liquid that is inside the syringe, and the pressure is now transferred equally around the container, because remember, the liquid is in a confined space. Okay, so what this does is the liquid is trying to look for an outlet where there's a space, where there's an outing, where the pressure can be released, and by doing so we end up having the plunger moving forward. Okay, and what happens is that we've got an output force that causes the plunger to move. And so basically the hydraulic system is using liquid to create a mechanical advantage. What do we mean when we say mechanical advantage? We are saying that this is giving us the ability to do work by applying very little force. Okay, so since liquids are incompressible, that is, a liquid cannot be squeezed. A liquid is different from air, where air, because of the particles, the spaces between the particles, it enables air to be compressed a bit before it becomes incompressible. But liquid, as long as it is in a confined space where there's no bubbles, there's no air spaces, you're not going to be able to compress it. So this transfers an input force that is applied to the liquid, and this force is applied equally right through the liquid. So let's look at the basic principles of hydraulics. So number one, a fluid has no shape. Okay, it takes the shape of whatever container you put it in. And then number two, a liquid cannot be compressed. That is, you can't squeeze it together. And number three, a liquid transfers or transmits the pressure that you apply to it in all directions, and therefore increases the work, or it gives you a mechanical advantage. Let's look at a diagram that we have here. This diagram is showing us a hydraulic system. Okay, and it's showing us an input force being applied to one piston, that is, and what we get is an output force that is applied to the other piston. Okay, so input force on piston A, and then we get output force on piston B. So basically, we've got our cylinders that are containing the liquid, and what is happening is that the area of piston A is 100 millimeter square, and area of piston B is also equal to 100 millimeter what? Square. So they are all equal. They are all what? Equal. Hence, this is going to give us an equal output force and an equal input what? Force. So the force we apply as input is going to be the resulting force that we get as output. Why is that? Because the pistons all have the same size area. Okay, let's look at what every hydraulic system is made up of. So when I say every hydraulic system, this is anything you can think of. It can be your hydraulic car brakes, it can be your hydraulic brakes, hydraulic lifts, or it can be hydraulic door, whatever hydraulic machine you can think of. This is what it is made up of. Okay, so number one, it has a unit that houses the input piston, like a cylinder, okay, and it's called a master cylinder. And then it also has a unit housing the output piston, okay, like in B, which is called a slave cylinder. And then both pistons are connected by means of a pipe, and this pipe gets filled with fluid. And another thing that has to happen is that there mustn't be any air bubbles. I remember the old engine cars, or I don't know how many of you have seen when car brakes are getting fixed. So when you are replacing your discs on your car, there is hydraulic cylinder there on your car pads. Okay, so what happens is that because you have opened them up to change the brakes, the air gets in. So what happens now is that you sort of like need to pump out that air out. So I don't know how many of you have seen brakes for cars being replaced. So this is what basically has to happen. Otherwise, if you leave that air inside that cylinder, what's going to happen is that when you apply the brakes, it's going to take time for the car to brake. Why? Because there is that air space. But if you get rid of that air space, the moment you apply the brakes, because liquid cannot be compressed, it applies pressure and causes the brake pads to brake your vehicle. I hope this is making sense. Okay, so let's talk about hydraulics and mechanical advantage. So as I've already mentioned that a hydraulic system offers us mechanical advantage through the fact that it applies pressure to the force is applied to the liquid. In turn, the liquid distributes this force equally, enabling us to get mechanical advantage on the output force. Okay, so the large mechanical advantage in a hydraulic system is due to the ability of the fluid to transmit pressure equally. We can use a small input force on a small piston to achieve a much larger output force on the larger piston. Okay, let me repeat that one. We can use a small input force on a small piston to achieve a much larger output force on a large piston. This is where we get our mechanical advantage. Remember, we said mechanical advantage is the ability for us to do work without applying a lot of effort. So basically what happens is that the force we are applying is less than the output force that we get. Let's take an instance of a car jag. When you are jagging your car, you will find that you just apply a very small limited effort to the jag, but what is the jag doing? The jag is lifting up the car for you. Something that you wouldn't have to do, you are not going to be able to do if you try to do it by yourself. Okay, so you'll be able to change your car tire if you have a problem, as long as you have a car jag. Okay, so here is the formula for pressure. It is force divided by what? By area. That's the formula for pressure. Force divided by what? By area. So Pascal's law tells us that the pressure created by the small piston is the same everywhere in the liquid. It is the same everywhere in the what? In the liquid. So this, we have to put this in mind, that whatever hydraulic system we are using, doesn't matter how large, how small it is, the force we are applying or the pressure that gets created inside, okay, is the same everywhere in the fluid. It's the same. Okay, now since the large piston has a large area, it is able to increase the what? The pressure, because it is having a large area. If you remember previously, we had two pistons that had the same area of pistons, right? The sizes were the same. So in this case, there is no pressure, there is no mechanical advantage we're going to get in this system, because the same amount of force we apply on the input cylinder is the same amount of force that we're going to get out of the what? The output cylinder. Okay, so the force and area of each piston determines the mechanical advantage we get from our hydraulic system. So these also form ratios that must be equal. Okay, so what are we saying? This is the formula. We have force of small piston divided by area of small piston, which is equal to force of large piston divided by area of large piston. In other words, this equation needs to balance. Okay, this equation needs to what? Needs to balance. So this is basically the basics of a hydraulic system. Like I said, it doesn't matter it's a bus brakes, a car brakes, a hydraulic jack, a lift, that is your any machine that is using hydraulic principles. This is the law that applies. Okay, we make use of the law by Pascal, that whatever force or whatever pressure that is exerted on the liquid, it gets distributed, it gets transmitted equally right through the liquid, okay, in all directions. Okay, so one key thing we need to keep in mind is that our confined space, or our container that the fluid is being contained in, should be absent of any air spaces. There shouldn't be any air spaces. This enables now us to be able to have a proper working hydraulic system. Okay, so lastly, let's just look at this picture here of what we are saying. We've got a small force, and this gives us a bigger force. So like, for example, like I've mentioned, can be used for lifting and lowering things. So you've got your car jag that's lifting up heavy things. We've got carriages for an aircraft, buckets and diggers on earth movers. Okay, remember those things that go into the ground and then they grab the what? They grab the soil. They are making use of what? Of hydraulic systems. Okay, so they tip into the trucks, and we've got our forklifters. So our forklifters, they are able to raise what? The items. So you can raise a very heavy load. Why? Because the liquid cannot be compressed. Once it raises up, the liquid now fills up the pipes and it cannot go down because the liquid cannot be what? Compressed. So a small force at one end of a hydraulic system produces pressure in the fluid, and this creates the what? A bigger force. Okay, because this force is being applied over a large area. It is being applied over a large what? Area. So in the next lesson, we want to talk about larger forces versus greater distance they need to what? To move. Okay, so we will be looking at these formulas once more that we mentioned, and now we'll be working out real examples, working out some real problems that I'm going to be posing to you. And I hope this video was informative for you, and I hope to see you again in my next lesson, which is going to be talking about large forces versus greater distances to to move. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Take care.